I would very much like to welcome you on behalf of Initiatives of Change. We are dealing with one of the most topical and one of the most discussed issues in the world today, which is about extremism. And during this evening, we are going to do something slightly different in that we are going to move beyond extremism. Issues concerning extremism is nothing new to Initiatives of Change. It has a 60-year experience in dealing with extremist views of all hues, providing a dynamic alternative to changing society and dealing with the injustices in the world today. Initiatives of Change is a worldwide movement of people from diverse cultures and backgrounds who are committed to transforming society based on changes in human motives and behavior. And the challenge is that you be the change that you want others to be. Many of the world's problems we feel and their solutions are rooted in the human heart. Fear, hate, and greed and indifference perpetuate injustice, poverty, and conflict. Yet it is also in the human heart and in human nature where people have the ability to be compassionate, to be courageous, to be committed, and to be creative. And we suggest that people can be the change they wish to see. And each person has something unique to contribute to building a just and a sustainable world. And IOC's mission is to address these problems in society by linking personal change to global change. So it is within this context that we have the topic this evening of dealing with beyond extremism. And for that, there is no other better person to take us through this than Ahtsham Ali. Ahtsham Ali is the Muslim advisor for Her Majesty's Prison Service. He's also the president of the Islamic Society of Britain. Ahtsham has an MA in Theology and Religious Studies and has spent 9 years part-time specializing in Islamic jurisprudence. He was part of the Community Cohesion Review team set up in the wake of the 2001 disturbances in the north of England and helped to author the Cantel report, which some of you may be familiar with. So the procedure today will be that we have, of course, Ahtsham, who is our principal speaker, and then we have another bit of icing on the cake in the sense that we have Urfan Azadi, who is from BASIAN, and I will introduce him afterwards, who will also participate in the process. So, without much further discussion, Ahtsham, please.
So what makes an extremist? There is no single profile. There is no single method or pathway. When you study and document the lives of Muslim extremists, you don't find, right, there's the common factor. It takes time. No one wakes up and says, I'm an extremist today. It's a gradual process. Doctors, teachers, unemployed, converts. A few things are slightly common. Many of them, and not all, because we've already found, come from a Salafi or Wahhabi origin, but then stray off course. Because Salafism and Wahhabism at its core is not violent, but they stray off that path. They rarely accept ikhtilaf or tolerance of difference of opinion. You don't find an extremist saying, well, you see, on the one hand and on the other hand, no, it's black and white. Marginal issues become issues of belief and disbelief, iman and kufr. And they hardly ever have scholars. Very rare, which is itself dangerous. Usually male, but of course not always, as we saw with Roshanara, who stabbed the MP. But normally it's a male. And maybe some degree of vulnerability, marginalization, maybe experiences of racism, maybe. And I say maybe because, of course, again, we've seen extremists without that trajectory. Low-grade jobs, a sense of victimization, a sense of we're a small pawn in a big game being played out by superpowers, a sense of aggrievement, conspiracy theories galore. I mean, absolutely galore. Everything is CIA or Zionist or something. No, nothing is ever Muslims are doing it. They may have been overseas for a time, but not always. Some exposure to extremist ideology, books, DVDs, tapes, and definitely now more common than ever, internet. And as fast as you can close a site down, 2 more set up. Charismatic leader who gives them a kind of personal interaction, becomes a surrogate dad, if you like. Brotherhood, feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of a clique, a club. They would do anything for me, that kind of mindset. And sometimes, rarely, but we've found recently a criminal past where they think actually participating in a jihad here, killing people and dying in the process might atone for their criminality before. So this is, in summary, again, all of these are not always, maybe, because there is no single thing that I can point to and say this is who they are, this is what they are. In Islamic jurisprudence, you have Quran, which we believe is the word of God, and Sunnah, the actions or the commendations of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He's misunderstood it. And I'll give you a little anecdote. I was at in Newcastle University, and I rushed down to prayer in the Students' Union Muslim Islamic Society mosque area we had. Rushed down to prayer, and I noticed these 2 students, and they were mature students. They were sitting in the library, Islamic library, and they weren't praying. So I went and prayed and came back, and I sat there and I said, you didn't pray in my zealous days. You didn't pray. And he said, no, brother, we didn't. I said, is there a reason? He said, yeah, the imam was wearing a tie. I said, and what's the problem with wearing a tie? He said, the Prophet, peace be upon him, never wore a tie. I said, but brother, and this guy is a doctor. He is doing his postdoctorate in medical science. so I said, the trousers you're wearing, the Prophet never wore trousers like this. So he said, but I'm not leading prayer. So, the old philosophical argument, reductio ad absurdum, you take the worst case. And so I said, if an Eskimo in Alaska became Muslim, do you want him to take off his big woolen boots and put on sandals because the Prophet wore sandals? He goes, yes. Because that's what the Prophet's way is. I said, brother, 6 foot of snow, he would die of exposure. He said, not die, he would be shaheed. He'd be a martyr. So, there's no give there. It was just impossible. He misunderstood following the Prophet in an extreme way. Now let's come to the man himself, Osama bin Laden. To make a fatwa, you need to be a specialist in Islamic jurisprudence. Osama bin Laden is an engineer. He's not qualified to make a fatwa. And that's the first thing you do when you hear somebody say, Sheikh Osama bin Laden said, I says, please stop there. What did you say? Sheikh is not a scholar. Say engineer Osama bin Laden if you want to say it, but he's not an Islamic scholar. He has no credentials. And if you look at, you see, the first paragraph there will resonate with Muslims worldwide. In what creed are your dead considered innocent, but ours worthless? By what logic does your blood count as real, and ours no more than water? And he hits on a particular thing that grieves so many people, Muslims and non-Muslims. You get one English person dying in a war or whatever, and it's front page news. But 500, whatever it is, Rwandans dying or whatever it is, it's back page news or middle news. We're caught up with this patriotic thing, whereas human life is human life. One life is the same no matter who, color, creed or whatever. And so what he's saying is resonates very well, but his next paragraph now twists it. Reciprocal treatment is part of justice, and he who commences hostilities is the unjust one. So what he's saying is, to kill in reply is justice. No, it isn't. It isn't. Was it Mahatma Gandhi who said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, I think, yes? And that's absolutely right. It is not. Reciprocity is not in Islam. But of course, extremism is not limited. The famous Spanish Inquisition, horrible. There's a very good book by Ahmed Thompson, Blood on the Cross, which describes how Jews were gathered, Muslims fled across to Morocco, and the sheer mayhem that was created with the Inquisition as it marched through Spain. And of course, one of our early terrorists, Guy Fawkes. The Lord's Resistance Army, which is, I'm sure you're well aware, in Africa, and the mayhem that they create with child soldiers and so on. And what's interesting is the wording that they use. And people ask us, are we fighting for the 10 Commandments of God? That is true, because the 10 Commandments of God is a constitution that God has given to the people of the world. I wish they'd follow it. But that's the Reverend Jim Jones, back in 1978. 909 people died in Guyana, and 303 of them children, because of this man and his extremist views. And he was very well connected to the Congress in America. His actual base began in America, and then he left to Guyana to set up his base there. And of course, us, 1993, David Koresh, who had convinced his flock that he was the Messiah come back. And I just think to myself, he'd convinced couples in his congregation that the husbands could not sleep with their wives. It was not allowed. And only he could sleep with their wives. I think, what kind of mindset allows you to believe that? And yet they did. They venerated him. They fought to their deaths for him. And we forget, actually, a third of the people who died were British nationals, mainly from Manchester area. Again, how extremist ideology works and wreaks havoc.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening to everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Ahtsham Ali, that was a very good presentation on what you did and what you said, and it is something that I can relate to practically. My life started in academia. I run an organization now. I've been running for 7 years, but I was heading towards a degree in computer science, computer-aided design, and I ended up in the world of drugs and crime. I was studying at university in Luton at the time, and I started selling Class A drugs on a huge scale across Milton Keynes and Luton. I'm from Reading myself. I ended up getting hooked on drugs, and I stayed on it for about 4 years in total. You mentioned vulnerabilities. I was vulnerable at the time, and my father thought that the best thing for me was to fly me out to Pakistan which is my father's origin country, where I was given religious education and I was taught my religion. For the first 2 weeks I was there for, I was withdrawing off the drugs. They knew this, so they were giving me spiritual guidance. But after that, they started introducing me to military weapons, explosives, how to create bombs. For me, it was fascinating because I just left a world of crime and I was going into something which I thought is very appealing to me. So again, you talked about vulnerabilities. In England, vulnerability, especially in drugs, is a very difficult subject to tackle. For them, my vulnerability was something to expose to what they wanted me to do. At the time, I thought everything was justified. Again, like you were saying about how these grievances of Palestine, Iraq, every day, every morning, after my first 2 weeks, they used to talk about Kashmir every day. One story they told me about, they found a lady in the fountain over the mountains of Kashmir, and they said that we open our hands, and in Urdu it said we are the soldiers of God that was promised, and she was dead. These are the sort of things they were telling me on a daily basis, trying to pump me up with rage. At the time, it was justified. I was thinking this is what a Muslim duty is. And then they took me to Afghanistan, where I was fighting against Northern Alliance, believe it or not. For me, it was just a movie, really. For me, it was just like, this is amazing. I was in England. This is something I would have dreamed about, fighting in a war and justifying it through my religion and thinking I'm doing right. But then I saw things. I saw Taliban smoking hashish on the front line. I didn't even know much about jihad at all. I didn't know what jihad is. All I knew was that this is something which is quite appealing to me. I was enjoying it. I was showed pictures of bin Laden. I didn't know who bin Laden was at the time. But my Amir, the leader of my camp, he fought the Russians with bin Laden. And he showed me pictures of bin Laden and they said to me, do you want to meet this guy? I didn't really care who he was at the time. 6 months prior to 9/11, they told me to stay, but I just happened to say I want to go back now. There's a lot of things leading up to why I wanted to go. I saw too much death, really. And it was just getting out of control. I saw too much limbs missing, and people's eyes were missing, and it was just horrific for me. I came back to England. I could say I was radicalized because the people who I grew up with, I had the hate for them, really. I came back and I decided to become a renegade and try to stop drug dealing in my area. So I started robbing all the dealers in my area, and then I had a lot of drugs again. So I was thinking, what was the purpose of that? So I remember one time that there was a conflict between Afro-Caribbeans and Muslim Pakistanis on drug turfing. And I happened to be in the middle of it and trying to say that you're not going to harm my Muslim brothers, regardless of what they do. They're spreading poison in the whole community, and there was me defending them just because I thought they're Muslims. This is my mindset, what it was like. Anyway, I came back, and people asked me what made me change, because even though I came back, the network of people who I went were in Afghanistan, were in England as well at the same. That's how we actually. There's a large network of people. Even the Tipton guys, we're still in contact with me. And why I changed is that, like you said, the interpretation really found people who really understood Quran and Hadith and the knowledge and the Sunnah, and this is what made me change. And since then, now what I'm doing now is that the same vulnerabilities that I went through, drugs, crime, the organisation BASIAN itself works with people with drugs and crime, but actually we cover violent extremism as well, because we see, my experience, I was on drugs and ended up being violent extreme. I could have become a violent extremist, but I had extremist views when I came back to the UK.